The sky above New Haven turned red as the first warships broke through the clouds. Cole was eating breakfast with her father when the emergency siren started screaming across the colony. She dropped her fork and looked at him with wide eyes. Ben Cole, the chief engineer of the mining colony, was already on his feet and running to the window. "Get away from the glass," he said, his voice calm but firm. Had never heard her father sound scared before. Today, she heard something in his voice that made her stomach twist. The colony of New Haven was home to 3,000 humans. It sat on a rocky planet at the edge of human space, far from Earth and far from help. The people here mined rare minerals and sent them back to the inner colonies. It was quiet work, safe work, or so everyone thought. The Empire had been expanding for centuries. They had conquered 37 worlds and absorbed dozens of species into their territory. Humans were new to space, still learning their place among the stars. They saw them as weak, soft, and easy to break. Their military databases listed humans as a low-threat species, dangerous only in large numbers and with proper weapons. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the colony below. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as reports came in from his ground forces. The orbital defense platforms had been destroyed in the first wave. The colony's small security force was fighting back, but they were outnumbered and everything was going according to plan. "Begin the ground sweep," ordered. "Capture the workers. Kill anyone who resists. This colony will serve the Empire by sunset." Down on the surface, and her father ran through the streets of New Haven. People were screaming and running in every direction. Dropships were landing in the main square, and tall alien soldiers in black armor were pouring out of them. They moved with perfect coordination, their weapons firing bright blue bolts of energy that cut down anyone who stood in their way. Ben grabbed her hand and pulled her into a side alley. "The maintenance tunnels," he said. "We can hide there." They reached the engineering building where Ben worked. He used his access code to open a hidden door in the floor. Below was a dark tunnel that smelled like metal and dust. Ben pushed toward the ladder. "Go down," he said. "Follow the tunnel until you reach Junction 7. There's a supply room there with everything you need." "Come with me," begged. Tears were running down her face. She was 17 years old, and right now she felt like a little girl again. Ben shook his head. "I need to help the others. I need to." The door behind them exploded inward. 3 soldiers stepped through the smoke, their weapons raised. Ben pushed down into the tunnel and turned to face them. "Run," he shouted. "Survive, whatever happens, survive." She fell into the darkness and hit the ground hard. Above her, she heard her father's voice, then the sound of weapons firing, then silence. She wanted to scream. She wanted to climb back up and fight, but she remembered his last word to her. "Survive." Ran through the tunnels. She had been in these passages many times with her father. He had shown her every corner of the colony's underground network, teaching her how the power systems worked, where the water lines ran, and how to fix anything that broke. She had thought it was boring at the time. Now, that knowledge might save her life. She reached Junction 7 and found the supply room her father had mentioned. Inside was a small space filled with emergency equipment. There was food, water, medical supplies, and weapons. Hands shook as she picked up a hunting rifle. She knew this gun. Her father had used it when they went hunting together in the forests outside the colony. New Haven was a dangerous world. The forests were full of predators that could tear a human apart in seconds. Ben had taught to shoot when she was 12 years old. He had taught her to track animals, to read their movements, and to kill them quickly and cleanly. She had never liked hunting, but she was good at it. Next to the rifle was something she didn't recognize. It was a small device with wires and a screen. A note in her father's handwriting was taped to it. "Neural targeting system. Prototype. Sync with your implant." Had a neural implant like most colonists. It helped with education and communication. She had never used it for anything else. but her father had clearly been working on something secret, something military. She pressed the device against her temple and felt it connect to her implant. Information flooded her mind. The device showed her the layout of the colony above. She could see heat signatures, movement patterns, and structural weaknesses. It was like having a map of everything around her drawn directly into her brain. She sat in the darkness for hours, listening to the sounds of the invasion through the walls. She heard screaming and gunfire. She heard the heavy footsteps of soldiers marching through the corridors. She heard announcements in an alien language, ordering humans to surrender. Did not surrender. When night came, she climbed up through a ventilation shaft and looked out at her colony. They had taken control of everything. Human prisoners were being led in chains toward the landing zone. She saw her neighbors, her teachers, and people she had known her whole life, all of them with their heads down and their spirits broken. She searched the crowd for her father but could not find him. She didn't know if that was good or bad. The targeting system in her head highlighted a patrol of 6 soldiers walking toward her position. They were talking to each other in their own language, laughing about something. Their scanners showed them that a single human was hiding nearby, a young female, not a threat. Checked her rifle. She had 12 shots, 6 soldiers. She would need to be fast and accurate. She would need to be everything her father had taught her to be. She thought about the scared girl who had fallen into the tunnels this morning. That girl was gone now. The person who remained was something else entirely. Cole took a deep breath, raised her rifle, and began to hunt. The first soldier died without making a sound, moved through the shadows like water flowing through cracks in stone. She had spent her whole life learning to be quiet in the forests of New Haven. The predators there could hear a heartbeat from 50 meters away. Compared to them, these alien soldiers were deaf and blind. She came up behind the soldier at the back of the patrol. Her knife found the gap between his helmet and his armor. One quick motion, and he fell. She caught his body and lowered it gently to the ground, then slipped back into the darkness before the others noticed. The patrol continued walking. They didn't know one of their own was already dead. Circled around to the front of the group. Her targeting system showed her exactly where each soldier was looking, calculated their blind spots, and highlighted the best positions for attack. It was like having a teacher whispering advice directly into her brain. The second soldier stopped to check a doorway. He was alone for just 3 seconds. That was enough. Stepped out of the shadows and her knife did its work again. 2 down, 4 to go. This time someone noticed. One of the remaining soldiers called out a name and received no answer. He called again, louder. The patrol stopped moving. Weapons came up. Lights swept across the street. Spread out, the patrol leader ordered in the language. His implant translated his words automatically. Find the missing units. They found the first body 30 seconds later. The leader's 4 eyes went wide with shock. These were trained soldiers of the Empire. They had conquered worlds. They did not die in dark streets to invisible enemies. Contact command, the leader said. His voice was less steady now. We have a hostile, unknown type. Request backup. Listened to their radio chatter through the colony's communication network. Her father had built that network. She knew how to access it. She knew how to hear everything the aliens said to each other. The third soldier died while trying to radio for help. He had separated from the group by just a few meters. That was all the distance needed. Her rifle was silent thanks to the suppressor her father had installed years ago for hunting. 1 shot, 1 kill. The soldier dropped and his radio clattered on the ground. 3 down, 3 to go. The remaining soldiers were panicking now. They stood back to back, weapons pointing in every direction. They were calling for backup but had already done something to slow that down. She had cut the power to the local communication tower. Their signals were weak and broken. Help would not come quickly. It's just 1 human, the patrol leader said, trying to calm his soldiers. Our scanners show a juvenile female. Stay focused. One of his soldiers pointed at the bodies of their fallen comrades. "Does that look like the work of a child?" Smiled in the darkness. She was not a child anymore. The invasion had burned that away. What remained was something harder and colder, something built for survival. She raised her rifle and shot the fourth soldier through the head. He fell before anyone could react. Now there were only two left, and they were running away from a 17-year-old girl. Followed them. Her legs were strong from years of hiking through the rocky hills around the colony. Her lungs were built for the thin air of New Haven. She could run for hours without getting tired. The soldiers, with their heavy armor and their fear, could not. She caught up to the fifth soldier in an alley. He turned to fight, but his hands were shaking so badly that his shots went wide. The shot did not miss. He joined his comrades on the ground. The patrol leader was the last one alive. He had stopped running and was standing in the middle of the street, his weapon raised, turning in circles as he searched for the ghost that had killed his soldiers. "Show yourself," he screamed. "Face me." Stepped out of the shadows. The patrol leader saw her for the first time. She was a human girl with brown hair and blood on her hands. She was wearing simple colony clothes and carrying a hunting rifle. She looked nothing like a warrior. She looked like someone's daughter or sister. For one moment, the patrol leader hesitated. In the Empire, children were protected and treasured. They did not fight. They did not kill. Surely this young one would surrender now that she was facing a trained soldier in open combat. That moment of hesitation was the last mistake he ever made. His bullet took him between his upper eyes. He was dead before he hit the ground. 6 soldiers, 6 kills, stood among the bodies and felt nothing. She had expected to feel sick or scared or sad. Instead, she felt empty. The tears she had cried for her father were dry now. The fear she had felt in the tunnels was gone. All that remained was a cold, clear purpose. She would kill every on this world. She would free her people, and she would find out what had happened to her father. Back at the command post, received the report of the lost patrol. He stared at the screen showing 6 dead soldiers and 1 heat signature moving away through the streets. A juvenile female, according to the scanners. A child. "Who is targeting that human teen?" he demanded over the open channel. His voice echoed through every helmet on the planet. The response came from one of his officers, speaking slowly and carefully. "Commander, you don't understand. She's not the target. She's the one doing the targeting. She killed them all." Was silent for a long moment. In his long career, he had fought against every kind of enemy. He had faced armies and war machines and alien monsters, but he had never faced anything like this. A single human child was hunting his soldiers like they were prey. "Find her," he ordered. "Send a full squad. I want her captured alive. I want to understand what we're dealing with." He did not know it yet, but he was dealing with something that had never encountered before. He was dealing with a human who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. He was dealing with the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. And she was just getting started. The soldiers started calling her the Ghost. They whispered the name to each other when their commanders weren't listening. They said she could walk through walls. They said she could see in the dark. They said she was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. In truth, Cole was just a girl who knew her home better than they did. The colony of New Haven had been her playground for 17 years. She knew every tunnel, every air duct, every hidden passage. She knew which doors made noise and which ones didn't. She knew where the cameras had blind spots and where the patrols walked. A week after the invasion, her kill count had reached 41. 41 soldiers had died at her hands. Some she shot. Some she stabbed. Some she killed using the colony itself as a weapon. She would lead patrols into sealed sections and then vent the air into space. She would damage power lines and wait for technicians to come fix them. She would poison water supplies and contaminate food stores. They were learning to fear the dark, but was not alone anymore. On the third night, she had found a group of prisoners being moved to a labor camp. There were 30 humans, chained together and guarded by 4 soldiers. Killed the guards in less than a minute. She used the access codes she had taken from dead soldiers to unlock the chains. Among the freed prisoners was a young man named Danny Price. He was 19 years old and had worked as a mechanic before the invasion. His hands were covered in burns from the torture they had used to extract information, but his eyes were clear and steady, and when offered him a weapon, he took it without hesitation. "I want to fight," he said simply. "Can you shoot?" asked. Danny nodded. "My dad was a hunter, taught me everything he knew." Almost smiled. On New Haven, everyone learned to hunt. The forests were too dangerous for people who couldn't defend themselves. They had invaded a planet full of people who knew how to kill. There was also Dr. Lisa Morton, a woman in her 50s who had been the colony's main doctor. She had escaped the initial roundup by hiding in the hospital morgue. When they searched the building, they found only dead bodies. They didn't think to check if all the bodies were actually dead. Dr. Morton joined the resistance and set up a hidden medical station in the tunnels. She treated wounds, mixed medicines from stolen supplies, and kept the growing group of fighters alive. She also gave advice that went beyond medicine. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said one night, wrapping a bandage around a cut on his arm. "You haven't slept in 3 days." "I'll sleep when they're all dead," replied. Dr. Morton shook her head. "You'll make mistakes when you're tired. Mistakes get people killed. Get some rest. That's an order." Wanted to argue, but she knew the doctor was right. She found a quiet corner of the tunnel network and closed her eyes. For the first time since the invasion, she slept. The resistance grew day by day. Word spread through the prisoner camps that someone was fighting back. Humans who had given up hope started to believe again. Some of them escaped and joined group. Others stayed in the camps and became spies, passing information to the resistance through secret signals. By the end of the second week, had 50 fighters under her command. They were mechanics, miners, teachers, and farmers. None of them were soldiers, but all of them were humans who had lost their homes and their friends and their normal lives. All of them wanted revenge. Watched the reports pile up on his desk and felt something he had not experienced in a long time. It took him a while to recognize the feeling. It was fear. He had sent his elite hunters after the ghost. They were the best trackers in the military, trained to hunt down enemies across any terrain. The ghost killed them all in a single night. She left their bodies arranged in a circle, their weapons taken, their armor stripped. He had deployed drones to scan the colony from the air. The ghost shot them down one by one. She seemed to know exactly where they were and exactly when they were most vulnerable. He had used thermal scanners to track heat signatures through the buildings. The ghost used this against him. She would create false heat sources, leading his soldiers into traps. They would chase shadows while she attacked from behind. Studied human history in his quarters, trying to understand his enemy. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had a long history of warfare, longer and bloodier than almost any species in the galaxy. They had fought each other for thousands of years before they ever reached space. They had developed weapons and tactics that made the methods look primitive. Worse, he read about human children who became warriors. He read about young fighters in resistance movements across human history. He read about teenagers who led armies and won wars. The idea was horrifying to him. In society, children were kept far from violence. The thought of a child killing soldiers was unnatural, wrong, impossible. But the evidence was lying in the morgue. 41 of his soldiers were dead, and a 17-year-old girl had killed most of them personally. Made a decision. He would stop trying to capture the ghost. He would stop trying to understand her. He would use the one weapon that humans couldn't resist. He would use their own compassion against them. He ordered all the prisoners in the main camp to be moved to the central square. He made an announcement over every speaker in the colony. His message was simple. To the human called the Ghost, if you do not surrender yourself by sunrise, I will execute 100 prisoners. You have until dawn. In the tunnels below, heard the announcement. Danny looked at her with worried eyes. You're not actually thinking about surrendering, are you? Shook her head slowly. No, I'm thinking about how many soldiers will be guarding those prisoners at dawn. Hundreds, Danny said. Maybe more. It's a trap. I know it's a trap. Checked her weapons and began loading extra ammunition into her belt. But those are my people in that square. I'm not going to let them die. You can't beat hundreds of soldiers alone. Looked at Danny and then at the 50 fighters gathered behind him. They were tired and scared but they were still standing. They were still ready to fight. I won't be alone, she said, stood on the balcony overlooking the central square and watched his trap take shape. 200 soldiers surrounded the area. Snipers were positioned on every rooftop. Armored vehicles blocked every street. In the center of the square, 300 human prisoners sat in chains, waiting to die at sunrise. It was perfect. The Ghost would either surrender to save her people, or she would watch them die. Either way would win. He would break the spirit of the resistance and restore order to this miserable colony. But as the hours passed, found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the girl, about the hunting rifle and the bodies of his soldiers. He kept reading the reports of her attacks, looking for patterns, trying to understand how one human child could cause so much damage. The answer, he realized, was that she didn't think like a soldier. She thought like a hunter. To her, his soldiers were not warriors to be respected. They were animals to be tracked and killed. She used the same skills she had learned hunting the predators of New Haven. She just applied them to a different kind of prey. Had never been hunted before. The feeling was deeply unpleasant. As dawn approached, he received reports from his scouts. Movement in the tunnels. Heat signatures gathering near the square. The Ghost was coming, but she wasn't coming alone. She was bringing her entire resistance force. 50 humans against 200 soldiers. Allowed himself a small smile. The Ghost had finally made a mistake. She was outnumbered 4-1, and his soldiers held every advantage. This battle would end the resistance once and for all. The attack began before sunrise. It didn't come from the direction expected. Explosions ripped through the power grid on the east side of the colony. The lights went out across the entire square. Emergency generators kicked in, but they only provided dim red lighting. In that darkness, shapes began to move. Had spent 3 days preparing for this battle. She had mapped every position they might use. She had studied their tactics, their formations, and their weaknesses. She had placed traps and explosives throughout the surrounding buildings. She had even found a way into the sewer system that ran directly beneath the square. The first wave of her attack came from below. Danny and 10 fighters emerged from manholes behind the lines. They opened fire on the soldiers from behind, creating chaos and confusion. The neat formations broke apart as soldiers turned to face this unexpected threat. The second wave came from the rooftops. Had sent her best shooters to take out the snipers before the battle began. Now those positions belonged to the resistance. They rained fire down on the soldiers below, picking off officers and heavy weapons teams. The third wave was herself. She walked into the square through the front entrance, her rifle raised, her targeting system painting enemies in her vision. She moved like water flowing around rocks, never stopping, never slowing. Every shot found its target. Every movement took her closer to the prisoners. Watched from his balcony and felt his heart freeze in his chest. He had seen soldiers fight before. He had seen warriors and heroes and legends in action, but he had never seen anything like this girl. She wasn't fighting. She was performing art with violence. His soldiers shot at her and missed. She seemed to know where every bullet would go before it was fired. She ducked and weaved and rolled, always one step ahead of their aim. And while she dodged, she kept shooting. Her bullets never missed. "Kill her," screamed into his radio. "All units focus fire on the girl." But his soldiers were too busy fighting for their own lives. The resistance fighters were everywhere now, pouring out of buildings and tunnels and hiding spots. They fought with stolen weapons and homemade bombs. They fought with knives and pipes and bare hands. They fought like people who had nothing left to lose. They had conquered 37 worlds. They had defeated armies and crushed rebellions, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't follow rules or formations or honor codes. They did whatever it took to win. Reached the prisoners. She shot the locks off their chains and pressed weapons into their hands. 300 more humans joined the battle, turning the odds from 4-1 against the resistance to nearly 2-1 in their favor. The fighting spread through the streets of New Haven. Building by building, block by block, the humans pushed back. Soldiers who had laughed about conquering a soft species found themselves surrounded by angry civilians with guns. Ordered a retreat, but his soldiers were too scattered to respond. He ordered air support, but had destroyed the landing pads 2 days ago. His ships couldn't land and his troops couldn't escape. For the first time in his career, was losing a battle. He stood at the window of his command center and watched the chaos below. Through the smoke and fire he saw her, the ghost, the girl. She was walking toward his building, her rifle in her hands, her face calm and focused. She had killed at least 30 of his soldiers personally in the last hour. Her clothes were torn and bloody. She had cuts on her arms and face, but she was still moving forward. Behind her came the remnants of her resistance force. They weren't 50 people anymore. They were hundreds. Every prisoner she had freed had joined the fight. Every human who could hold a weapon was now part of her army. Understood then what he was facing. He wasn't fighting a rebellion. He was fighting a species that had evolved to be the most dangerous predators on their world. Humans were soft and kind and gentle because they chose to be, not because they had to be. When that choice was taken away, when they were pushed to violence, they became something terrible. The doors of his command center exploded inward. Cole walked through the smoke, her rifle aimed at his heart. Her soldiers spread out behind her, covering every exit. Had a weapon in his hand, he could try to fight. He could die with honor like a proper commander. Instead, he put his weapon on the ground and raised his hands. He wanted to live. He wanted to tell his people what he had seen. He wanted to warn them. Humans were not a soft species. Humans were monsters who had learned to wear masks of kindness. And when those masks came off, nothing in the galaxy could stand against them. Looked at the commander who had ordered the death of her neighbors and the capture of her father. She had dreamed of this moment for 2 weeks. She had imagined all the ways she might kill him. But looking at him now, kneeling on the floor with fear in his 4 eyes, she felt something unexpected. She felt tired. She was so very tired. "Where is my father?" she asked. Her voice was steady despite her exhaustion. Swallowed hard. "The engineering teams were sent to the flagship in orbit. They wanted your colony's chief engineer to help them understand human technology." Nodded slowly. Her father was alive. That knowledge filled her with new strength. "The battle is over," she said. "You've lost. Now we need to talk about what happens next." Battle for New Haven ended 3 hours after it began. When the smoke cleared, the streets were filled with bodies. Most of them wore armor. The survivors were being gathered in the same square where the prisoners had waited to die. But now the chains were on different wrists. Stood in the center of the square and looked at what her people had accomplished. They had taken back their colony. They had defeated an army. They had proven that humans could not be conquered so easily. But the cost had been high. 47 of her fighters had died in the battle. Dr. Morton was treating dozens more with serious wounds. The colony itself was badly damaged, with whole sections destroyed by the fighting. It would take months to rebuild. Danny walked up beside her and offered her a bottle of water. She took it without speaking and drank deeply. Her throat was raw from shouting orders during the battle. "The communication array is back online," Danny said. "We've sent a message to the nearest human fleet. They're 3 days away." 3 days. They would have to hold the colony for 3 more days before help arrived. The flagship was still in orbit. It could send reinforcements at any time. The war was not over yet. "What about the prisoners?" asked, looking at the captured soldiers. 112 survivors. They're scared. They think we're going to kill them." Shook her head. "We're not like them. We don't execute prisoners." She walked toward the group of captured. The soldiers flinched as she approached. Some of them closed their eyes, expecting death. These were warriors who had conquered worlds, and they were afraid of a teenage girl. Was at the front of the group. His hands were bound with the same chains that had held human prisoners that morning. He looked up as she stopped in front of him. "Why haven't you killed me?" he asked. "I ordered the attack on your colony. I'm responsible for everything that happened here." Studied his face. 4 eyes, gray skin, a mouth full of sharp teeth. He looked nothing like a human. But right now, with fear and confusion in his eyes, he reminded her of the young soldiers she had killed in the streets. They had all looked like that at the end. Scared, confused, unable to understand how they had lost to such an unlikely enemy. "Because killing you would make me like you," she said, "and I refuse to become what you wanted to make us." Shook his head. "I don't understand you. We came here to conquer your colony. We killed your friends. We captured your father, and you won't take revenge." "Revenge is for people who have nothing left to build," replied. "I have a colony to rebuild. I have people to protect. I have a future to create. I don't have time for revenge." She knelt down so she was at his eye level. Around her, human soldiers kept their weapons ready, but no one interfered. "I want you to listen carefully," said. "I'm going to let you go. I'm going to put you and your soldiers on a shuttle and send you back to your flagship. And then I want you to deliver a message to your empire." His eyes widened. "You're letting us go." "I'm giving you a chance to prevent more death. Your people need to understand what happened here. They need to know that humans are not a soft species waiting to be conquered. We are a species that learn to be kind because we know what we're capable of when we're not." She stood up and addressed all the prisoners. Her voice carried across the square. "You came to our world thinking we would be easy prey. You thought our schools and hospitals were signs of weakness. You thought our kindness meant we had forgotten how to fight. You were wrong." The soldiers stared at her in silence. Some of them had served in the military for decades. They had fought against species that built their entire cultures around warfare. None of those enemies had scared them like this small human girl. "Humans didn't become kind because we lacked the capacity for violence," continued. "We became kind because we know exactly what we're capable of, and we choose to be better. We choose to build instead of destroy. We choose to heal instead of hurt. We choose to teach instead of conquer. But when someone threatens our families, our homes, our way of life, we remember what we really are." She paused and let her words sink in. "Go back to your empire. Tell them what happened on New Haven. Tell them a colony of miners and mechanics and teachers defeated an invasion force. Tell them a 17-year-old girl killed over 50 of your soldiers. And tell them that if they ever think about attacking human space again, they should remember us. They should remember what we can do when we stop being kind." The shuttle launched an hour later, carrying and the surviving soldiers back to their flagship. Watched it rise into the sky and disappear among the stars. She didn't know if her message would matter. She didn't know if they would listen. But she had done what she could. Now it was time to rebuild. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived. 20 warships dropped out of hyperspace and surrounded the flagship. After a tense hour of negotiation, the aliens. They took their ship and their surviving soldiers and fled toward the edge of human space. The fleet admiral, a woman named Grant, came down to the colony to meet the heroes of New Haven. She expected to find professional soldiers or experienced fighters. Instead, she found a group of civilians led by a teenage girl with tired eyes and a hunting rifle. "You did all this?" Admiral Grant asked, looking at the battle damage across the colony. "Nodded. We did what we had to do. The reports I've received are incredible. Your tactics, your strategies, your kills. Military academies will study this battle for generations." "I'm not a military strategist," said. "I'm just a girl who grew up hunting dangerous animals that were just another kind of predator." Admiral Grant smiled and offered her hand. "Well, Ms. Cole, if you ever decide you want to make a career of it, the human military would be honored to have you." Took her hand and shook it. She hadn't thought about the future in weeks. She had been too focused on survival to imagine what came next. "First, I need to find my father," she said. "They took him to the flagship before the battle. We've already located him. He's being brought down on the next shuttle. He's safe." For the first time since the invasion began, felt tears in her eyes. Real tears, not tears of grief or fear, but tears of relief. Her father was alive. Her people were free. They had won. An hour later, she was standing on the landing pad when the shuttle touched down. The doors opened and Ben Cole walked out. He was thin and tired, with bruises on his face and bandages on his arms, but he was alive. Father and daughter ran to each other and embraced. No words were needed. They held each other and cried and let the weight of everything they had survived pour out of them. "I'm so proud of you," Ben whispered into her hair. "I knew you would survive. I knew you would find a way." Pulled back and looked at her father's face. "I did more than survive, Dad. I fought back. I saved our people." Ben nodded, his eyes filled with wonder and sadness. "I heard the stories on the flagship. They called you the Ghost. They said you were a monster, a demon, something that couldn't be real." "I'm not a monster," said firmly. "I'm human, and humans don't let their families suffer without fighting back." The liberation of New Haven became a turning point in the war between humans and the Empire. The story of the teenage girl who defeated an invasion force spread across the galaxy. Other species heard about it and started to look at humans differently. The soft species, the peaceful species, the species that built schools instead of weapons, was actually one of the most dangerous creatures in the known universe. They signed a peace treaty within 6 months. They returned all conquered human territories and agreed to stay far away from human space. Himself became a historian, writing books about the invasion of New Haven and the girl who became a ghost. Cole grew up to become one of humanity's greatest military strategists. She led fleets and won battles and trained the next generation of fighters. But she never forgot the lesson she learned in the tunnels of New Haven. Humans were not dangerous despite their compassion. They were dangerous because of it. A species that loved so fiercely would fight even more fiercely to protect what it loved, and nothing in the galaxy could stand against that kind of determination. The stars were vast and full of dangers, but as long as humanity remembered who they would never need to be afraid. They would face whatever came together as a species that had learned to be kind and learned to be deadly and had chosen, in the end, to be both.